Welcome. I'm just going to allow a second or two for everyone to just enter. Good morning. It is wonderful to have you all back for a new lineup of monthly Wednesday webinars, which is proudly sponsored by the Dairy Standard Agency. And it's really good to see a huge audience. So welcome to you all. I'm Jacqueline Odendaal from the DSA, and Janri Klopper from Plaas Media will facilitate the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So special thanks to Plaas Media for their marketing and their technical support. We have, as you know, a crucial topic today. Foot and mouth disease. Where exactly are we now? And I believe that you will have many questions. So you are welcome to write it in the question bar, or you can raise your hand during the Q&A session to ask your question directly to the presenter. Yandri then will unmute you from her side, but then you must also, from your laptop side or your device, you must also unmute yourself. And yes, we are in a fortunate position to have a well-known expert. You all know him, Dr. Mark Chimes, with us today, who will sort fact from fiction and give an update on what is being done and where South Africa currently stands in terms of FMD control. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Chimes, veterinary advisor and manager of the Animal Health and Welfare Program for Milk South Africa. So over to you, Dr. Mark. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you for the opportunity. I must admit, when we booked this session in January, we didn't realize that our timing would be so perfect. There's been a lot that's happened just in the past week. In fact, I've had to rewrite this webinar probably about 7 times, the last time this morning, as new facts and rules and regulations come through all the time. Although I'm a member of the ministerial task team, I'm actually speaking as a representative of the dairy industry today, and I'm not wearing my task team hat, obviously being privy to information that I'm not allowed to share on this forum. Now, just some background. Historically, the control measures were originally written for a period when we were foot and mouth disease free without vaccination. And the situation has since changed drastically. Remember, in the old days, we only had foot and mouth disease in the Kruger Park. So we only vaccinated all along the Kruger Park and along the Mozambican border. So any animal that was vaccinated, we knew was from the controlled zone, and therefore they were placed under quarantine as well. Unfortunately, now the situation has changed, and we're still using the rules that applied when we were foot and mouth disease free, and those rules have to change quite drastically for us to get out of this mess and then move forward. We cannot have control measures that cause more harm than the actual disease. It would be pointless. In terms of market access, what we need to know is that we should keep the end in sight. The end is what Minister Steenhuisen keeps saying, which is we want to get our WOA accreditation back as being foot and mouth disease free without vaccination. But looking at countries that had to do this and trying self-cleared from foot and mouth disease, this is a process that's going to take at least 10 years. So we need to deal with the problem that we have now. And the state has to also had to get their mind around this, because we've had a mindset currently, or up till recently anyway, where the state has this concept that state-controlled disease means that they have to do absolutely everything, including vaccinating the animals and drawing blood, etc., which is not necessary. Their control is an oversight, and they should give us the rules, tell us what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to do, then monitor us and make sure that we're doing it correctly, and obviously do the record keeping and the traceability, so that they can then eventually hand their reports to WOA and say that we've been good people and we're following the rules. Also, the government's focus up to now has been on eradication. whereas the industry focuses on market access. We want to keep trading alive. The farmers obviously need income. Now, we've already lost our foot and mouth disease-free accreditation from WOA in 2019. So it's been almost 7 years now that we've not had that status anyway. So why are we focusing so much on that at this stage? At first, let's get the disease under control, and then we can always try and get our foot and mouth disease-free status back at a later stage. And then currently also the meat and dairy are subject to very specific processing requirements for export. When you place a farm under quarantine, be it because they were vaccinated or because they've got foot and mouth disease. And it causes certain idiosyncrasies within the system. For instance, with an abattoir, if they receive animals from a foot and mouth disease farm, and they immediately lose their export license. But what you find is that the skins, the hides, once they're processed, are actually by WOA standards allowed to be exported. And but because the abattoir has lost its export license, they can't export it, even though it is safe to be exported. So these are the idiosyncrasies that we need to try and sort out. We've got a similar problem in the dairy, where WOA says, well, if you want to export milk, it should either be UHT treated or double pasteurized. And double pasteurization is heating it to 72 degrees at least for at least 15 seconds. And it's got to be done twice. But now we have a product, let's say like condensed milk. Condensed milk is manufactured by using pasteurized milk. It's already been pasteurized. Then it goes through the condensed milk process, where it is heated to over 100 degrees for more than 5 minutes. So the second process is actually to a higher standard than a second pasteurization. Yet the South African authorities still read the rules as no, the milk must be double pasteurized first before you're allowed to make condensed milk. So we're fighting for this equivalence as well that allows for whenever we meet or exceed the standards of WOA, then the rule of equivalence should kick in. And this is allowed by WOA. So hopefully these things will be brought into place in the near future as well. Now, first of all, there's some breaking news. This was actually announced this morning. What happened is we've been told that we can vaccinate widely. There's vaccine arriving in the country. And the current rules were still that if you vaccinate, you're going to be placed under quarantine, and then with all the consequences that come with that. And everybody was running around wanting to know what's going to happen. So Dr. Mike Modisani has now allowed a amendment of the rules temporarily until the new rules are actually published. That's supposed to replace the old rules. So with immediate effect. So from today, all animals, if you want to be vaccinated, must be identified for lifelong traceability. Now, with identification, the original rule was everybody's going to have an RFID tag, etc. Currently, they're saying if you've got a good system of identifying your animals and you have good record keeping, let's say like in the dairies, all those animals already have tags, there's good records, etc. The government will accept that system. If you bring animals that don't have any tags, let's say such as the communal cattle, then they will be tagged at the time of vaccination so that they can be traced. There will be no more F branding, not even for animals that have foot and mouth disease, currently. You'll be allowed to slaughter your animals at any abattoir from 3 months after day 0. But currently, the carcass must still hang for 24 hours if you're from a foot and mouth disease farm. There's a big fight to have this changed. Professor Amanda Bastos did some amazing research on foot and mouth disease recently, where they slaughtered animals that had foot and mouth disease and took samples from every tissue in the body to see how long the virus survives. And basically what they're saying now is that 6 weeks after day 0, there was no virus in any tissues except the throat and maybe the feet. So that we're hoping that these rules will now change, that say 6 weeks after day 0, you can slaughter at any abattoir and you don't have to hang the carcass. So we hope to get that fight through still. But it's still, if you're slaughtering animals with foot and mouth disease, they're not allowed to be exported unless the importing country is happy with our rules and regulations, in which case you can export. For milk, there will be no restrictions on milk from farms that voluntarily vaccinate their animals. So you can carry on as normal. Um, and also, if you've got foot and mouth disease and you send your milk to the processor, it will only need single pasteurization if it's only used for the domestic market, not for export. But once again, if the importing country is happy with how we process the milk, then that milk may still be exported to that country. Now, you must remember these rules, this literally came out this morning, so the rules are changing so quickly that we're still making some of this up as we're going along. Obviously, we won't know what the hiccups are until we actually start applying all these things, so expect a lot of changes. And I do need to explain that this is partly the reason why my slides are so boring. There's not going to be many pictures, purely because I've had to completely change the thing several times. Now, as regards vaccines, you must realize that the vaccine is not a silver bullet. It's not going to just get rid of foot and mouth disease overnight. But it will help a tremendous amount in slowing down the spread of the disease. But the initial aim with vaccination is to reduce the production losses that we're suffering. If an animal is vaccinated, some of them will still get foot and mouth disease, but they will have less severe symptoms and they will be excreting less virus, and therefore they will be infecting less other animals. And so we can slow down the spread of the disease, but biosecurity and movement control is still going to be required. And if you get foot and mouth disease, you're still going to be placed under quarantine. It's the only way we can control that the animals don't move and that we know where they all are, to prevent the spread of the disease. Now, previously, the vaccine, what happened with the vaccine orders, specifically last year, the only supplier we had was Botswana Veterinary Institute vaccine, which contained the SAT 1, 2, and 3 strains, or it's called the trivalent vaccine. And they could produce about 700,000 doses a month. So they warned us and said, well, in October, they're going to be closing down their factory for their annual maintenance. And if we want some vaccine, we need to order. And somewhere in July, August, there was vaccine available. And for some reason, the government sat on their hands. They didn't order. And then Zimbabwe took about 400,000 of those doses. And there was only 300,000 doses left to get into South Africa. Come September, and the BVI had another 700,000 doses of vaccine. And once again, for some reason, the government didn't place the order. And the Feedlot Association went to the RMIS and said, they want to import this vaccine. They're willing to put the money down. So the RMIS then negotiated on their behalf with the government. The RMIS didn't pay for any vaccine. They didn't import any vaccine. They merely facilitated the negotiations. So the government relented and said, okay, they can import it, but it must be imported through Onderstepoort Biological Products, called OBP, and it must be stored there because it is a controlled disease. So they ordered the vaccine because they obviously foresaw that if the factory is going to close in October, it's going to open in November, start manufacturing. That takes about 6 weeks before the vaccine arrives in South Africa. So the next batch would theoretically only arrive by mid-December, and we couldn't be without vaccine for such a period. The vaccine arrived, and they got some of the vaccine, the feedlots, and then for some reason the government didn't want to release the vaccine. And the feedlot people were saying, look, the reason they want the vaccine is not just to vaccinate the feedlot. It's actually to go to the farmer that supplies them with animals, to vaccinate the animals on their farm, quarantine them on the farm for 28 days, and if they show no symptoms, then bring them into the feedlots. Because the problem was they were getting too many animals that were incubating the disease, and they were constantly getting infected with foot and mouth disease and being placed under quarantine. And this would have opened up the market for the beef farmers. And for some reason, that was not allowed. And rumor has it there's still, I don't know, 100, maybe 200,000 doses of this vaccine lying in OPP's fridges, despite the country burning down. So this is a bomb that still has to burst as to how many vaccines are still left and were not released at a time when we actually needed the vaccine. Then what happened is in early October, I think, the BVI informed us that they've got about 80,000 doses still left on their shelf and it's going to expire. Are we interested? Then the MPO jumped in and said, okay, they'll take that vaccine. I think they took something like 50 or 60,000 doses and the government took the balance. And then the MPO, they couldn't actually administer the vaccine themselves, but through negotiating and working in conjunction with the government, they were able to determine which dairy farms needed vaccine the most, were the most critical, and they would then talk to the government, and the government would then allow those farms to be vaccinated or send out the state vet to do it. And all these vaccines that were then used up by early January, and then we had virtually no vaccine left in the country. Now, the supply outlook since has changed. As you'll see there, the Onderstepoort vaccine, which was registered in 2022. In 2022, it was registered. It's the only foot and mouth disease registered vaccine in the country. All the other vaccines, the Botswana vaccine, after all these years, still not registered. It's still being imported under an emergency section 21. So Onderstepoort produced 12,900 doses, which were released about 2 weeks ago, with promises of producing 20,000 doses a month and then increasing it as the year goes on. Fingers crossed that happens. The Botswana Veterinary Institute they didn't open in November as expected. There were some problems with the factory, so they only really started manufacturing vaccine again in January. So their first new batch is only due to arrive next month of 700,000 doses. Argentina, in the meantime, had 1 million doses of SAT1, SAT2 vaccine sitting on the shelf. It didn't have SAT3 in it. And we were wondering whether we should import it. And then the ministerial task team said, look, the biggest problem we're currently having in the country is with SAT1 and SAT2. SAT3 is not really featuring very much. Let's import it. It will at least be a stopgap until such a time as sufficient vaccines are available. And also the Argentinians also said, well, they'll be adding the SAT3 and that should be available from March onwards. So we've received their 1.5 million bivalent 1 million doses of bivalent is what arrived last week, Saturday, in the country. And that is currently being distributed and vaccinated. The animals are being vaccinated with that. So they can offer another 1.5 million doses in March and then 6 million plus a month after that. They're probably the world's largest manufacturer of foot and mouth disease vaccine. So a very, very trusted company. The Turkish vaccine, they've been fighting for approval to get it imported since October last year. Excuse me. And it's been a major fight and all sorts of questions being asked of them before they could get it in under an emergency section 21. And also, they said they're not manufacturing the vaccine until they get an order. So the MPO, that's the Milk Producers Organization, they went to the Turks and said, look, they'll take 600,000 doses. And then the red meat industry said, well, they'll take another 450,000 doses, which brought it to just over 1 million. And then the Turks said, well, let's make it a round figure of 1.5 million. We're pretty sure somebody will take the vaccine once it's available. And thank goodness they did. So that is due to arrive this coming weekend, the first 1.5 million doses. And there's another 5 million doses order being placed. And it is, the approvals are stuck at SAHPRA. They're the organization that has to approve all pharmaceuticals coming into South Africa. And it is as if they just don't realize the urgency of the situation. If we don't get these orders placed now, and the same applies to the Argentinian vaccine, the next 1.5 million doses, that still needs to be approved as well. And it's just stuck in the system. And the Animal Health Department cannot sign the import permit until the Section 21 emergency approval is given. And if these things aren't done now, we're going to use the, what, 2.5 million doses that's coming in now will be used up, and that we might end up with a window where there's no vaccine available again until the next lot arrives. So there's a lot of hiccups within the system, and it's as if we just cannot get the sense of urgency through to some of the departments. And obviously, because of this lack of vaccine within the country, it's a case of a boer maak 'n plan, and the farmers started importing vaccine, well, smuggling vaccine from Kenya. Now, the Kenyan vaccine only contained the SAT1 and SAT2, but it also contained the O and the A virus initially. And there's serious concerns when it comes to the Kenyan Vaccine Institute regarding their quality control, because their foot and mouth disease vaccine was blamed for an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Central Africa. And the lumpy skin vaccine was blamed for an outbreak of lumpy skin in Asia. And we were concerned at that stage that if it's not inactivated properly, that we might actually establish the O and the A strains within South Africa. Fortunately, the farmers got the message, and they then started smuggling responsibly and only imported the vaccine that contained SAT1 and SAT2. Now, somewhere between 200,000 and 1 million doses of this vaccine has been administered to animals in South Africa. It's impossible to verify because obviously it's all hush-hush and under the table because it's illegal. But if this gap hadn't been created in the market by the lack of urgency within the authorities, this situation would never have materialized in the first place. And by all reports, the vaccines seem to certainly help the farmers that did use it. Now, the 1 million doses that are arriving or has arrived last week, this is how it's being allocated to the various provinces. Obviously, the provinces that are the worst affected get the most vaccine. Those that are the least affected get the least. Now, there is a counter argument that says, no, you should actually, the most of the vaccines should go to the cleaner provinces, such as Northern Cape and Western Cape, to prevent them getting as bad as the rest of the country. Why do we want to get them to get as bad before we start vaccinating? But who's going to tell the farmers that's been suffering and living in the face of imminent foot and mouth disease, where they're surrounded by foot and mouth disease? Who's going to tell them, no, sorry, we're going to have to sacrifice you for the benefit of the greater good? The biggest question really here is, let's say KZN and Free State receiving 200,000 doses. Strictly speaking, that needs to get into the animals before the next batch arrives, which is this coming weekend. Will they be able to do it? I mean, you're talking something like 40,000 animals a day that need to be vaccinated. And if they were not going to be using up all this vaccine, wouldn't it have been better to have allocated more realistic amounts to them and then move some of the vaccine to the other provinces that don't get as much? Limpopo, that get 100,000 doses, they were supposed to have vaccinated all along the Kruger Park, the protection zone, in February. They didn't because there wasn't any vaccine available. And it's a major problem with elephants and buffalo trampling down the fences. So a big chunk of that vaccine will be used for the protection zone, and only what's left will be able to go to the other parts of the province. Now, the question is, how will the vaccines be allocated? And it's almost like a Sophie's Choice situation. And for those of you, especially the younger people who don't know Sophie's Choice, it was a movie that came out years ago about this Jewish lady that got captured by Nazis, and she had 2 children, and they said she can only keep one child, and they're going to execute the other child, and if she doesn't choose which one she wants to keep, then they're going to execute both. And she had to then choose between how do you choose which child you keep and you don't. And it's a similar situation with the vaccines. How do we decide who gets vaccine and who doesn't? Because everybody is screaming for vaccine. And how do you tell somebody, sorry, we might be sacrificing your livelihood for the greater good of the country? Um, and I'm very fortunate that I don't have to make that decision. But what the ministerial task team has done is we've developed the heat map based on the number of infected farms. So that shows you where the real hotspots are. But that doesn't give you the whole picture. It depends on how isolated are they, or how close are they to dairies, feedlots, high densities of communal cattle, game farms, piggeries, etc. We don't want this to go into the game. If it gets into, Limpopo province has 1,600 buffalo farms. And these are disease-free buffalo. If it gets into buffalo, they remain carriers for life. Then we're stuck. We're never going to get rid of foot-and-mouth disease. So all these factors have to be taken into account, and then you've got to look at what the potential impact is going to be. If you look at the let's say Mossel Bay, where we've got 4 farms infected, now it is geographically isolated in terms of the foot-and-mouth disease outbreaks in the country, but it's very, very close to a Geelhoutboom, which is a dairy-producing area between George and Kleinbrak. And if it gets in there, it's going to run all the way, similar as it did in Tsitsikamma. So even though you might not call Mossel Bay a hotspot, the potential impact is huge, and the potential for containing it is relatively easy. So some of the vaccines might be allocated for that, even though you might think it might be better allocated somewhere else, let's say KZN, where foot-and-mouth disease is running out of control. Now, Professor Holm suggested a bottom-up system. And what he means by that is that you, as the farmer, fill in your form to say, I want my animals vaccinated. It states exactly how many animals you've got and of which species. You then take it to your private vet or the state vet, and all those forms then goes to the local state vet, and it goes to province, and from there national, and then national can see where the demand is within the country and can then allocate vaccine accordingly. With that system, it means if they know there's 500,000 cattle in that area that needs to be vaccinated, they allocate the vaccine, it goes to the state vet, he allocates it to the private vets or the farmers, and the farmer will know. He will say, look, I ordered 500 doses of vaccine, so I must receive 500 doses of vaccine. It's very difficult to cheat in a system like that. So there's less chance of corruption or theft, because with a top-down system, you have where the national decides, oh, this province gets 2 million doses, they send it, the local state vet gets 300,000 doses, and he decides who it goes to. So there's always the chance that somebody's going to want to pay him to be chosen first. Or he could even turn around and say, oh yeah, I've injected 300,000 cattle, but how do we prove it? He might have injected 200,000 and sold the other 100,000 under the table. So a bottoms-up system would be much, much safer. Now, I've put on here an example of how to allocate the vaccine. Obviously, you're going to vaccinate buffer zones around infection first, because you want to contain that as much as possible. And the idea is to keep the quarantine zone as small as possible initially. If it needs expanding, then you expand it. But you vaccinate up to 10 kilometers out. And the idea is that the guys from the 3 kilometers to the 10 kilometers that are not quarantined might still be able to then trade as normally, because they've just vaccinated but not infected, although they will be monitored and they will be sampled to make sure that the virus hasn't escaped. And then we have sort of these tiers of priority. Where do you start? Your high-risk herds first. And strangely enough, informal settlements are actually quite high up on the list, purely because it's impossible to enforce biosecurity in the communal herds because they're not fenced. And secondly, movement control under the current system is almost non-existent. And as a result, these are the animals that are easier to move around and spread the disease, although they're not the only ones that do it, but make no mistake. And then you start moving to your high-risk herds, basically like dairy herds and piggeries, and that will be done in conjunction with the NPO and SAPO, which are the milk producers organizations and the pork producers organizations. Then beef herds, which will be done in conjunction with the red producers organization, and then we go down to other herds and affected species. Um, this is a guideline. It's not set in stone, but that we've got to have a system of some sorts to decide where it should go. And this is the WOA map that I drew off the internet last night. This was what was reported on the 20th of February in total. As you can see, all the outbreaks. Now, some of them might be old outbreaks, like down here in the Eastern Cape, there's currently one farm that's infected. The others have all been cleared up already. And you can see the Mossel Bay down one here, and the ones in the Cape, and then up in Kuruman. This map is slightly outdated. It's always about 2 weeks or so behind, because obviously these samples have to be confirmed first, and then it needs to be reported and loaded onto their site. So the most recent figures I could get, and once again, it's not 100% accurate, because I'm not exactly sure if some of these might include suspected cases, but the majority of these are actually confirmed cases. However, Dr. Mike Modisani yesterday confirmed we've currently got 1,072 confirmed cases. However, if I add up these figures, I get to over 1,200. And just to show you, for instance, look at Limpopo. They've got 24 confirmed cases with another 41 suspect cases. So, and this is the case in nearly all these provinces. So that doesn't mean the suspect cases will be positive, but they could be. We have a problem also with recurrent cases where farms were infected, vaccinated, given a booster, and then got infected again. Now, part of the reason might be that the vaccine's not as effective. Another part is that if you're exposed to high enough doses of virus, even if you are vaccinated, it's not going to stop the virus. And thirdly, also that you might have had a SAT1 infection the first time, and now you've got a SAT2 infection the second time. So there's no cross immunity between the different SAT strains. So having one strain does not protect you against the disease, unfortunately. And what I want to show you here is how we got into this mess that we are now. This is Onderstepoort. This part here, this big red circle, is the Onderstepoort Veterinary Institute and faculty. And then at the top here, this little red circle here, that is OVR TAD. That is where they do all the foot and mouth disease research as such. So if you zoom in a bit, this is the faculty on the one side. This is under the control of the University of Pretoria. Then you have this large block here. That is the Veterinary Research Institute, which falls under the Agricultural Research Council. This is where we do all the research on the animal diseases and finding solutions to the problems. Then what they did was in 1994 or after 94, the vaccine production facility of the Veterinary Research Institute was privatized, belongs to the government, and this is where vaccines are produced, and it's from here that the vaccines are distributed throughout the country. And unfortunately, through mismanagement and whatever else, we've suffered severe shortages of vaccines over the years, specifically things like blue tongue virus, vaccine, African horse sickness, etc. Things are improving, but it's not what it should be yet. Now, if we move to OVR TAD, which stands for the Onderstepoort Veterinary Research on Transboundary Animal Diseases. This facility specifically does research on African swine fever and foot and mouth disease. And this is where our bottleneck also then happens. If I may go back, OBP does not manufacture the foot and mouth disease vaccine at all. They merely receive it from OVR TAD, so the vaccine is manufactured there and then shipped to OBP, and OBP then ships it all over the rest of the country. And this is where the problem started. Onderstepoort formed the bottleneck. Now, the veterinary faculty is not part of the problem. The training there is still of very, very high standard. But the AERC took over the Veterinary Research Institute, and even that is now merely a shadow of the greatness that it once had. Onderstepoort Biological Products was privatized, and they manufacture and distribute animal vaccines, but they are the only facility, or were the only facility, allowed to distribute the foot and mouth vaccines. And they were given 500 million rand in, I think, 2014 somewhere, to upgrade their facilities so that they can produce vaccines. And the upgrade did happen with a lot of mishaps along the way. And a lot of that money went missing. This is the 500 million that Minister Steenhuisen is still looking for, and I don't think he's found any of it yet. Then OVR TAD is the only facility that may manufacture foot and mouth disease vaccine. They're also the only facility in the country that's allowed to do research on foot and mouth disease, and they're the only facility allowed to test for foot and mouth disease. So now you can see, if Onderstepoort burns down, we have nothing. It's the single point of failure, and it's this bottleneck everything has to go through. And remember, this whole lot was set up as a means of controlling FMD in a country that was foot and mouth disease free. It was a surveillance laboratory. It was not set up to handle an epidemic. In any case, OVR TAD in 2010 was awarded a budget of 500 million rand to build a new facility because their facilities were getting old. We needed new technology to produce new vaccines, etc. And in the meantime, they did their research. They got the vaccine registered in 2022. It's a brilliant a vaccine, extremely good. I almost sound like Trump. It's the best one ever. Nobody else has one like this. But it really is a good vaccine. The problem is that the plans were then drawn up. There were several changes to the plans made. The budgets were, the tenders were put out, and then the tenders were withdrawn because there were allegations of corruption and state capture and what have you. With the result that the ground has still not been broken 16 years further down the line, and now they need R1 billion to build a facility that would have cost $500 million 16 years ago. And then once they build it, it'll take about 2 to 3 years to finish the building work, and another 2 to 3 years to then install everything in the laboratory and get it tested and up and running. So on this side, no money is missing yet because they haven't actually received any of the money yet. Our diagnostic capacity has been a problem, as I mentioned already, because the lab was designed for surveillance. They tested animals all along the Kruger Park and that, and then a few animals throughout the country to prove to WOA that we don't have foot and mouth disease within the country. With the result that when all this happened, they were overpowered by the amount of samples, and it leads to the results taking very, very long to get out. It's improved a lot. About in 2024, there were some results where 3 months later, they still hadn't received results. After sending in samples. And there's still some reports like that now, but a lot less. And the problem is the serotyping takes even longer, because the first test they do is, if you send in a sample, is to say, yes, you've got foot and mouth, or no, you don't. That's the first part we need. The second part we need is we need to know if it's SAT1, SAT2, or SAT3. We need to know where the problems are, because currently in Botswana, they've got 700,000 doses of SAT2 vaccine sitting on their shelf, which we can buy tomorrow. But we can't, because we don't know which viruses we're fighting where. Let's say if in the Western Cape or in the Northern Cape, if we had confirmation that it was only SAT2 currently causing the outbreaks there, then you could consider then importing a monovalent vaccine as the stopgap to at least stop those outbreaks and vaccinate those areas and say, well, we'll get the SAT1 and the SAT3 vaccine into you when it arrives, but at least we can stop this and kill it in its tracks. Currently, we don't, because we don't know where we are. So additional labs are being considered. The ministerial task teams, a subcommittee on diagnostics, are investigating several labs. They have been checked, but it's not that simple. None of them comply 100% with the requirements to be able to receive and handle foot and mouth disease samples. Some of them are very close. And it's not only government labs. There's a few private labs that's been considered as well. But it's normally things like waste management. What do they do with their waste water? How is it treated? Do they have the filters required? They're not allowed to test. If they test any human samples, they're not allowed to be close to any susceptible species farms around the area. So very difficult to find labs that comply with all of this, but not impossible. So hopefully some of them will be coming online within the next 2 to 3 months if we're lucky. Another thing is that Onderstepoort didn't send samples to Pirbright. You've probably seen the brouhaha in the press. And the reason being that Pirbright is a reference laboratory for the world. The whole world sends their viral samples to Pirbright so that anybody that wants to do research on these viruses or want to test their vaccines can do so. And for some reason, Onderstepoort said no. There were stories that they claimed that they had intellectual property rights over a virus which is wild, in which anybody can go and catch and collect. An argument that still doesn't make any sense to us. But in the end, they relented, and the samples have been sent, and we're just awaiting those results now. Then furthermore, the research projects are also being hampered. Because all the research has to be done at OVR TAD, and they're overwhelmed. So they're not getting, and to give you an example, Milk SA commissioned a research project with Dr. Anthony Davis, who was very involved in the Tsatsikama outbreak with dairy animals, where he collected milk samples and swabs and blood samples and that from dairy farms from the day they were infected up to several weeks afterwards. The idea being to try and see how long the virus circulates in the blood and is excreted through the nose and through the milk, etc. So it's bulk tank samples and individual cow samples, even slurry dam samples to see how long it survives. And these samples have been lying at Onderstepoort for about 2 to 3 months now. And we realized that they're not going to get around to testing it, so we contacted Pirbright. They're very happy. They would quite happily receive the samples because they're doing some research on foot and mouth disease in dairy, so they want a lot of samples. And we're just stuck with admin and the paperwork. It's just been filling in form after form. Not all Onderstepoort's fault either. We also have to get permission to export the virus because it's a potential biological weapon, so we've got to get the biological weapons permits and things, and then that department sits on it for weeks before they process your application. The same with testing for vaccines. Any vaccine that comes into South Africa, it has to go through a virus neutralization test at Onderstepoort, and the Dolvet guys, there were several delays there. Not all Onderstepoort's fault, but it just didn't happen as fast as this should have happened. So what happened was, why are we where we are now is that we had this perfect storm that happened. From the middle of 2025, the virus started to spread out of KZN. And it was exactly at that stage that Dr. Livio Heath, who was the vaccine production research team manager, was suspended in the middle of a crisis. He is probably the most knowledgeable person on the continent, if not in the world, on the SAT strains in South Africa. And he's been at OVR TAD for 15 or 20 years. He gets suspended. And then the virus started spreading like wildfire from about October onwards. We were running out of vaccines. The Botswana Veterinary Institute closed, and there were no alternative supplies in place yet. The Dolvet vaccine was, I think they submitted their application in October. That hadn't been approved yet. And then the December holidays happened. So a lot of key personnel were on leave. And how do you get somebody to do something if they're not at the office? And it just, you all know what happened since then. It's been an absolute nightmare. We're waiting for the vaccines to arrive. It can't get here soon enough. And then the Botswana Veterinary Institute didn't open up in November as they should have or would have, but only in January, and the things just got worse from there. But it's not all bad news. There's currently 2 plans circulating or being revised, just so that you know. The one is the foot and mouth disease control plan. Used to be called the contingency plan, or the veterinary procedural notice. This is the one with all the rules that says you're going to be under quarantine for so long, you must hang a carcass for so long, you must double pasteurize the milk or whatever. That is being revised as fast as we can, and we'll hopefully have the drafts finalized by next week. But that plan is for the control of foot and mouth disease where there's an outbreak. The mass vaccination or the widespread vaccination plan or the voluntary vaccination plan is a different one. And that is the Section 10 application. And this is the one where we were fighting for, that those animals that are not infected, that get vaccinated, where you volunteer and say, I want my animals vaccinated, that those animals will not be placed under quarantine. So, first of all, preemptive vaccination is now being allowed. There's no quarantine required for preemptively vaccinated animals, which is great. Quarantine is being brought down to 6 months, most likely. If we're really lucky, we might actually get it down to 3 months, but that's still a bit down the pipeline. So let's be grateful for small miracles. There are rules being worked on how to move animals between different locations, especially animals that are under quarantine or were infected with foot and mouth disease. And it's not finalized yet, but it's things like if you've not had circulating virus or any animals with symptoms in, say, 28 days, you can move them to another farm, provided the other farm is vaccinated or is of the same status. The reason for that is that specifically the farms, the dairy farms where they've got heifer farms or dry cow farms, and they've got to move animals in between these farms so that when these cows calve, they've got to be at the farm with the milking parlor. Also, the thing that they're now allowing single pasteurization of foot and mouth disease, of milk from animals under quarantine for foot and mouth disease, which is never allowed before, provided obviously it's only for localized consumption. And we're getting the procedures and the permits standardized between all the provinces. So just to get to a conclusion, be very, very wary of the social media. There's a lot of snake oil being sold currently and claims made of how effective things are against foot and mouth disease. Most of it totally false or just very poorly informed as such. One of them is nanosilver. It's not that nanosilver doesn't work. It is just that it is registered as a feed additive and not as a medicine because there's no data available in terms of how effective it is. As a surface applicant, I'm sure it works well. If you apply to the tongue or to the feet or to the others that are sore, we know that silver will kill bacteria. The other problem is that we do not have any data on what is the allowable maximum levels of residue in milk and meat and what the effects on humans could be for long-term low-grade exposure. So because that is lacking, I'd be careful to actually dose animals with it as such. There's a thing on Facebook going around about putting sodium bicarb on the feet and the tongues, and then you add, or the sores, and then you add vinegar. Now, if you've paid attention in chemistry classes at school, you'll know that sodium bicarb is a base and vinegar is an acid, and if you mix the two, they neutralize each other. Makes a lot of bubbles, looks beautiful, but I doubt if it does much. However, if there's enough vinegar left, it'll drop the pH, and we know that a low pH will kill the virus, so it probably does do something. Then there's rumors of a non-registered vaccine. I've not been able to confirm if this is true, that Disease Control Africa claimed to have a vaccine of some sort. It's unlikely because it's not registered, number one, and only OVR TAD is allowed to do research with foot and mouth disease vaccine. So it might be a different medication that people think is a vaccine. And be careful of people that say, dose them with this, it only kills the bad bacteria and none of the good ones. It's like telling somebody that had chemo that, oh no, we only killed the bad cells, not the good ones. Guess what? Why do you feel like you're at death's door when you're on chemo? Because it kills your good cells as well. There's no antibiotic that can distinguish between a good bacteria and a bad bacteria. they kill everything in sight. And the same with these things. So don't believe that, especially with ruminants, because they use bacteria, viruses, and yeasts in their rumen to digest the grass. So if you kill those organisms, then you're going to get animals with bloat and rumen stasis. And just also, Minister Steenhuisen, I mean, let's give the guy credit. He was handed a poisoned chalice. Foot and mouth disease was already a problem when he came into control. Onderstepoort had already declined well before he turned up. So he inherited the outbreak, and he inherited a slow department. The sense of urgency just wasn't there, and it's picking up now, but it certainly wasn't there at the time. And even though he's a minister, he still has to comply with the law, so he still has to work with the likes of SAPRA that have to approve the emergency import of vaccines, the Department of Animal Health that has to sign off on certain things, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I feel sorry for the guy. I'm not trying to excuse him or anything, but it's a much more difficult situation than people realize. It's like swimming through syrup, to be perfectly honest. And just in closing, I mean, Bill Gates is not behind the outbreak. I mean, you hear these conspiracy theories that he's poisoning our meat and our milk with his vaccine, and he wants to take over South Africa. I don't think South Africa is very high on his thing. So, in closing, I want to leave you with Hanlon's razor. Hanlon's razor say, never ascribe to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence. In other words, it's better to assume someone's actions are the results of ignorance or lack of understanding rather than intentional cruelty. Okay, there's a lot of things going around. Oh yeah, the government wants to get the white farmers off their land and destroy agriculture, etc., etc. It's not the case. Never ascribe to malice which can be adequately explained by incompetence. Thank you.
Okay, there are some questions in the chat, and then I'll move on to anybody that has questions, then they can just raise their hand. So the first question is, for double pasteurization, does the milk need to cool down to 4 degrees Celsius before you repeat the cycle again?
Yes, as far as I know, although lately I think they've allowed that this just had to cool down. It just had to go through the process twice. It didn't have to cool down. But true pasteurization involves heating the milk and then cooling it down. So that would be the proper way to do it still.
Okay, another question. It's from the same person. They asked, is this the same single pasteurization on milk used for cheese making?
Yes, provided the cheese is not going to be exported. So you can single pasteurize as long as whatever is made from that single pasteurized milk is not going for export. So if you're a local cheese maker, single pasteurization is fine.
Okay. Are there plans for Onderstepoort to be able to manufacture more doses?
Yes. What happened is when in the past 16 years, they had an experimental machine or machines that could make small amounts of vaccine for experimental purposes. And they produced 50,000 doses of vaccine, which they then ran their experiments all along the Kruger Park. And that's how they got their vaccine registered. And once they had that, they then said, well, at that stage, we were only using about 150,000 doses of vaccine a year for the controlled zones. So they said, well, the new facility has not been built yet. Let's get some machines so that we can produce somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 doses a year, of which 150,000 would be for the controlled zone, and then we'd build up a buffer of about 500,000 doses for in case. And those are the machines that produce the first 12,900 doses now. It was a temporary arrangement that actually happened well before this big outbreak, because it took about 3 years to get the machines and installed and calibrated and everything. And the idea is that we should be able to produce just under 1 million doses a year by the end of this year. So nowhere near as much as we need, but certainly more than they planned. And then when the new facility is built, because that's still in the pipeline, they're just trying to find the billion rand to build it. So if the government approves the funding, then they were supposed to have broken ground last year already. So that can happen. But that's going to take 5 or 6 years before that's up. And that can produce something like 10 million doses a month or a year. That'll be world-class production once it's up and running.
For voluntary vaccinations, can we export the final products produced from that milk?
Yes. If you don't have foot and mouth disease, you don't have foot and mouth disease. It's that simple. If you're vaccinated, then you don't have foot and mouth disease. But if you start showing symptoms, or also if you're placed under quarantine because you might border a farm that has foot and mouth disease, in that case, they might expect you to double pasteurize for exports. So it's not 100% get out of jail free card, but we are trying to work on a system of how do we handle these farms that are in close high-risk farms that were vaccinated, that are too close to an outbreak. But as for the rest of the country, if you're not near an outbreak and you vaccinate voluntarily, then no restrictions whatsoever.
Local cheese makers that do not pasteurize their milk, would they be able to continue if the national herd is vaccinated?
Yes, provided they don't use milk from cows that have foot and mouth disease.
Is there any changes of legislation regarding exports of dairy products since all animals are going to be vaccinated?
Yes, this is what the new regulations are. So remember, none of the countries are concerned if you vaccinate an animal for foot and mouth disease. It's like if you vaccinate your dog against rabies, he doesn't have rabies. You're protecting him against rabies. It's the same here. You vaccinate him for foot and mouth disease. The confusion comes in because that is a rule that South Africa made when the only vaccinated animals were along the Kruger Park. So if you found a vaccinated animal, you knew that he came out of a controlled zone where he was not supposed to come out of. And that's caused the confusion. If we never had that system, nobody would be asking questions now about, if I vaccinate my cow, am I under any control? Does it have foot and mouth? No, they don't. A healthy animal that's vaccinated is still a healthy animal and is treated as a healthy animal that's not vaccinated. In fact, a non-vaccinated animal is actually more of a risk than the vaccinated one.
Okay, a tricky question. When do you envision dairy farming returning back to normal?
I must be careful that I don't express wishful thinking rather than reality. I think within a year, if we can get 80% of the national herd vaccinated within a year, we would have a greater sense of normality. What will happen is you will still have the odd pocket of flaring up. That will happen. And that's going to happen for a few years. And that's what's going to make it difficult to get our foot and mouth disease-free status back. Because we're going to have to now chase this disease back, starting at Cape Town and gradually chase it back to the Kruger Park. It's basically what it comes down to. So if there's an outbreak near your dairy, it's going to affect you. And with dairy cows being the most susceptible, obviously, I wouldn't say that they're more likely to get it because beef cattle get it just as easily. They just don't show the symptoms. So the majority of farms will have normality for long periods, but might have the odd scare now and again.
Why can legislation not be changed to allow private vets to have the foot and mouth disease vaccines on hand?
Well, the new rules that were announced on Monday allows private veterinarians to vaccinate under state control. As I said in my talk, the thing is with the state control is they still have this control mindset. And if we're going to, and they want records of who was vaccinated where, etc. To be perfectly honest, if we're going to vaccinate the whole country, do we need record keeping? Because everyone's vaccinated. Do we even need identification and traceability? Everything's vaccinated. Okay, but at some stage we're going to have to start proving to WOA, once we have foot and mouth disease under control, we must be able to prove that A, we don't have foot and mouth disease, and B, we must be able to show which animals were vaccinated, which animals aren't vaccinated, and therefore can we get our foot and mouth disease free status back in certain provinces without vaccination, for instance. That's where it comes in. But to be perfectly honest, here in the initial stages now, in my personal opinion, we might as well make it a free for all. The only thing is we just want to be sure that we vaccinate all the animals, and that is why there needs to be some form of traceability. But there's no real reason why private vets shouldn't be allowed to keep the vaccine and shouldn't be allowed to administer the vaccine, or at least oversee the farmer administering the vaccines to the animals. It is perfectly possible. They did this in Brazil, and it worked. The government just made sure that the rules were laid down within which it may happen and what records needed to be kept. And as long as that was complied with, they didn't care who gave the vaccine.
Is the OBP vaccine a trivalent vaccine?
Yes, trivalent, meaning it's got all three strains in it. In fact, it's actually got 5 strains in it. Let's say I think it's like 2 SAT1 strains and 2 SAT2 strains and 1 SAT3, something like that. But yeah, it's trivalent, and it's also a DIVA vaccine, so we can distinguish with the test between infected and vaccinated animals. Although the tests aren't always that trustworthy, but it is an approved DIVA vaccine.
If they vaccinate the animal with the foot and mouth disease vaccine, won't there be a trace of FMDs in the animal?
Well, they produce antibodies, but it's a dead vaccine. So in other words, they grow the virus in the lab, they kill it, and then put it in the vaccine. So it can't cause a disease whatsoever. So, but if you test them for antibodies, you might get a reaction there, because obviously they've got to form antibodies. But now with the DIVA vaccine, we can distinguish between the antibodies for from the vaccine and the antibodies that were formed against the virus. But these tests aren't 100%. And it also depends on how purified the DIVA vaccine was, whether it's going to cause any false positive reactions. But yeah, no trace of actual foot and mouth disease in that animal at all.
Does SAT2 infected cows only spread SAT2 virus?
Yes. So if an animal had SAT2, they'll only be immune against SAT2, and they can still get SAT1 or SAT3. So they can only spread the virus that they've got, so only the strain they've got. It's not impossible for a cow to have SAT1 and SAT2 at the same time. It's certainly perfectly possible. But generally, and there were some herds where they were tested and they had more than one SAT strain causing the infection in the herd. But they can only spread the strain that they're infected with.
What rapid tests are available now to detect SAT1 and SAT2 virus, and cost implications for the farmers?
There's none available in South Africa. They're not allowed. The reason being that the trustworthiness of the results of these tests is not always as high as it should be, the interpretation. And it opens up the market to a farmer saying, let's say somebody wants to buy his cattle, then he buys the kits, he tests himself, and then he says, oh, I don't have foot and mouth disease, but there might be a false negative in there, and then he sells the animals, and then the other farmer gets it, or they even lie when they only test so many of the animals, not all of them, etc. So there's a lot of pitfalls. It's not that we're not looking at it, it's just making sure that it actually has the impact that we want it to have. If I can put it that way. So no, currently they're not allowed. It's not legal to import them or use them.
Okay. One person asked, how and where can we access the forms to request vaccines, and how many doses do we need in South Africa per month?
Well, I would say what we can physically get into the animals. I'm sure if they gave the vaccine to the farmers, we could vaccinate all 12 or 14 million head of cattle in 1 month. So strictly speaking, we need 14 million doses this month, and then in 6 months' time, another 14 million for the boosters. But to get the forms, you need to contact your private veterinarian or your local state veterinarian. They'll be able to help you. They are available on the government websites. I'll be honest, I don't know where the link is yet, but I'm sure that it'll be flying around on WhatsApp as the day goes by. And I'll find out and I'll put it on the Dairy Standard website as well, so that you can look. I'm sure you can download it, but contact your local veterinarian or state veterinarian.
Okay. In some documentation, I read that some vaccines only give immunity for 2 weeks. What if I vaccinate and foot-and-mouth disease only hits after?
The water-based, there's two types of vaccines, the water-based and the oil-based vaccines. Now, the water-based vaccines, they give immunity really quickly, but the immunity doesn't last as long. So if they've never been vaccinated before, and you vaccinate them with a water-based vaccine for the first time, you need to give them a booster vaccination between 4 and 6 weeks later. And then after that, depending on the manufacturer, they need a booster vaccination every 3 to 4 months or so. With an oil-based vaccine, a single dose will give them immunity for 6 months, and then you just repeat your boosters every 6 months.
Are farms that are supplying secondary processors with raw milk for pasteurization obligated to inform the secondary processor of the FMD at their farms?
By law, yes. If you suspect that you have foot-and-mouth disease, you have to notify your state vet as well as your neighbors, and then obviously also any people that you supply with animal product, in this case milk. Yes, they need to notify the processor, and it's normally in the contract that is signed between the farmer and the milk processor. It normally stipulates that they need to keep them up to date with this, any changes that could affect the safety or the quality of the milk. So yes, they have to.
What is the restriction on the sale of raw milk to consumers directly at retail from farms with FMD?
You're not allowed to. If you've got FMD, you can't sell raw milk, period. In fact, most municipalities do not allow the sale of raw milk. There's only a few municipalities in the country that allow you to sell unpasteurized milk directly to the public. In most municipalities, it's illegal. But if you have foot and mouth disease, the milk has to be either in this case, has to be single pasteurized now. So it must be single pasteurized before you're allowed to sell it.
Can we assume there are also no culling restrictions on precautionary vaccinated animals?
Yes, there's no culling restrictions. So you can send your cull animals to any abattoir, and there's no restrictions on carcasses that need to hang or heads and feet that need to be thrown away and offal and that kind of thing having to be destroyed. No limitations at all.
How do foot-and-mouth disease vaccination strategies impact milk production economics in endemic regions?
It's not supposed to have any effect on milk production, although I know on the data sheet of one of them, I think it's the Turkish one, I'm under correction, but I think it's them, that says that there might be a slight temporary drop in milk production. It's probably in the cows in some cows, when you vaccinate them, it might cause a mild fever for 2 or 3 days afterwards. Same as in humans, some vaccines might make you sore or a bit feverish for a day or two. So I imagine it's that reaction that might cause a slight drop in milk production, but generally you shouldn't notice anything, shouldn't have any effect.
What level of herd immunity is being targeted to halt transmission?
We generally feel 80% national herd. If 80% of the animals are protected, we will be able to control the disease. Obviously, you want to aim for 100%. So, especially if you are close to an infection and that, you want to make sure that your whole herd is vaccinated. But remember, not all animals respond equally to the vaccine. Some animals will build up brilliant immunity. Other animals will not even produce any antibodies. There's always a percentage that just do not take, where the vaccine just doesn't take. So that's why you want to vaccinate 100% of the animals, but then you want at least 80% immunity within those animals. And that can be tested by testing the antibody levels after you're vaccinated.
Has the Dovet and Biogenesis vaccine been shown to have high potency? And is one dose of these vaccines sufficient? And are booster vaccinations planned?
The answer is yes on all of that. They were tested at some at Pirbright, some were tested at Onderstepoort. The potency is high enough. The strength to which the vaccines are mixed is good enough. It gives good immunity, and they need to be boosted 6 months later, and that is part of the planning.
What movement control measures are currently enforced in infected and surveillance zones?
Strictly speaking, if you're placed under any restrictions such as quarantine, you're not allowed to move any animals whatsoever without a Red Cross permit from your local state vet. So if you're in a surveillance zone, the same rule would apply. You can move the animals, because if you're only in the surveillance zone, it means you're not infected, but you're high risk. But if you apply for a movement permit from your state vet, they will look at various factors. It's difficult to say that, say, for so many months no animals may be moved. In some cases, they will allow it, depending on the circumstances of from where to where, how many animals are affected, what's the risk involved, etc. So all you do is you apply to your local state vet, and they will then assess your situation and issue you with a Red Cross permit to move the animals. But generally, if you're under quarantine, you may only move animals from your premises to an abattoir for slaughter.
Okay. There's a few people that have their hands raised. Yompi, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Dr. Mark, thank you very much. I think it's very insightful, and I think we all wanted to hear the answers to these many questions. I have one specific question that relates to the somatic cell count, where you tend to see an increase in the somatic cell counts, and obviously the suspicion that we had, which is a false one, that the vaccination of the animal caused an increase in the somatic cell count. That was the one thing that I can think we can put aside. But the other issue is, once you get the FMD, as you know, you see the sudden increase in somatic cell counts. There was a feeling that we must approach the Minister of Health to discuss the issue of a 500,000 cell count per milliliter, to ask for a sort of alleviation or a time-bound, put it in inverted commas, dispensation to deal with the issue of a potential increase in the somatic cell count. Now, we know that it is practice with some of the processes to blend the milk, or even at farm level, with milk low somatic cell count with high somatic cell count milk, to reduce and see if you can still reach the 500,000 at least. Now, surely a mixture of this milk could have a negative effect. It depends on what sort of product you're going to manufacture at the end of the day, like cheese and so on. It is possible. Would there be any rational thinking behind this approach of talking to the Minister of Health, or approaching the Minister of Health, to find some alleviation in this 500 somatic cell count, to at least establish a level of compliance? Because there is resistance to the fact that when milk reaches the processing plant and it's higher than 500,000, that there's bluntly the idea of we can't take this milk because it's in contradiction with the regulation 1555 relating to milk and dairy products. So I actually put the question out there in the public domain. Is it worthwhile considering this issue, or should we just live by good agricultural practices, managing disease, and see our way through until the vaccines now really started working in our heads?
Yompie, yeah, I think a temporary relief to allow farmers to survive, and also for food security purposes. Let's say they give us a temporary relief for the next year. The current application is that when the milk is picked up on the farm, the somatic cell count should be below 500,000. So if he's running at 600,000, then they say, no, we're not going to take your milk. Then the farmer has to dump that milk. And with the current foot and mouth disease spreading as it is, we're probably going to see a drop in milk production at some stage. So we're going to have a shortage, not necessarily a shortage, but certainly less milk. And if we have to dump even more milk on top of that, which could actually still be consumed. So if we can change that rule to say, let's say you allow a somatic cell count of 700,000 if picked on the farm, but provided that the somatic cell count in the bulk tank at the processor, once it's mixed all the farm's milk, if that somatic cell count is below 500, then it should be acceptable, so that they can accept some farmers up to 700,000. Because the first thing, as you know, with foot and mouth disease is that the somatic cell count literally shoots through the roof. I mean, 2 million, 4 million quite easily. That milk still has to be dumped. But once the herd has recovered from foot and mouth disease, it takes several weeks for the somatic cell counts to normalize. So they will run not excessively high, probably running at 600, 700,000 for several weeks, while it gradually comes down to below 500,000. So I think as a means of keeping these farmers alive and allowing them some economic leeway in the time of hardship is not a bad idea. I think we can do that temporarily.
Thank you.
Looks like that was all questions.
Wow, what an excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Mark. I hope you saw all the clapping hands. We absolutely appreciate the effort that you put in to bring us the latest news. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you. You can see all the clapping hands and little hearts. Thank you so much. It's really good to see that reaction. Well, people, our next webinar will be on the 25th of March, and then we will have the fortunate position to have Jompie Burger speaking to us about the potential quality defects. You've heard about the high somatic cell count and from infected FMD cows. So we are looking forward to that presentation. So please make sure that you save the date, 25 March. And then we will make sure that you can get the connection and the link to register. Please have a look at our social media and we'll keep you posted. And that is all said. Thank you again so much. May you all have a splendid day. Keep well.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.